And we are recording. Okay, so where we left off last time was talking about recommender systems. We just introduced the idea of them, how they're used, how they work, some typical pitfalls to avoid, that sort of thing. So today will be more about strategy. And we'll start off by talking about Amazon's recommender system in particular. So Amazon's recommender system is a big hurdle, a significant obstacle for competitors. Why? Because anybody who goes to Amazon, they're going to see those recommendations, and those recommendations tend to be pretty good. So it's easier to shop on Amazon if you don't know exactly what you're looking for, because you find one thing that's interesting, and then it'll suggest you a reasonable batch of other things, right? People will say, oh, maybe I'd be interested in buying those. And for a competitor to go toe to toe with Amazon, they basically need to include some rough equivalent of that feature. So we might fairly ask, suppose somebody like Google tried to say, Google says, well, we're going to go big into retail. We want to compete with Amazon there. So we might ask, what resources and data would be needed? Well, of course, you'd need a whole bunch of purchase type data. Now, maybe Google has some of that. They do watch a lot of what people do online, right? And they can see profiles like, oh, you clicked on this ad while you were looking at this product, right? Maybe that's a reasonable substitute for what Amazon is doing. But even if they have that, even if they have all that data, and I'm not saying it's as good as Amazon's, but even if they did, it would take a while to design and develop and implement that system successfully. Even for Google, this is something they're not going to build overnight. So there'd be some kind of time lag there. And we might ask, okay, suppose Google doesn't have data that's good enough. What might they do as a substitute? Well, one devious thing that Google's been on the wrong end of before is they might just piggyback off of Amazon's system. They might say, oh, somebody goes to Google looking at a product. Google actually sends out a call to Amazon's system, looks at the same product on Amazon, finds the recommendations there, and pulls all of those things that it actually carries in stock and brings them on its own recommendations. And Amazon probably wouldn't like that. They'd eventually find some way to block that. But Google would say, look, this is publicly available information. It's not like we're exactly stealing anything. And to a point, they would be right. Now, I said Google was on the wrong side of this one. So about 10 years ago, a little more than 10, Bing, who is the sad second banana to Google, Bing was actually had some trouble fulfilling oddball queries that people would initiate. And so what Bing would do would be go to Google and lift those search results and send them back to Bing users. And Google figured out that that's what Bing was doing. So they set a trap for them. They made some really weird queries that if that query went into Google, then Google would send them out a bunch of really equally odd search results. And then to prove that, in fact, that's what Bing was doing, then Google engineers went in and ran those queries through Google, which sure enough, called up Google and asked for the search results and delivered those. And, basically Microsoft shrugged and says, well, look, Google, again, we're not really stealing anything. You have this stuff out there. So yeah, kind of screwy, but that's the way the world is. But the point is, the recommender system is a big thing for Amazon. It helps them out a lot. And if a competitor wants to compete successfully against Amazon, they're probably going to need something like that. Now, Amazon in particular gets massive scale advantages because of how much data it has. It has data on a huge range of products over a large batch of users and over a very long time, right? Close to 30 years worth of data altogether. And the fact that it has that tremendously large amount of data is going to reduce sampling errors. So anytime you take a sample of data, right, some subset of data from a bigger batch, there's a chance that whatever you learn from that sample isn't going to match the reality, right? So when you see these newspaper polls, for example, they say, we randomly called 1,000 Americans and asked them what they thought about this. And typically they'll have the disclaimer, margin of error plus or minus 3%. It means it's pretty likely that the true value is within about 3% of what that poll got. But, they only asked 1,000 people. They didn't ask everybody. So it's very likely there's some error, right? But the more data you have, the bigger your sample is, the less likely it is that you'll have some oddball, unusual sample of data that's very different from, the average. So all that tends to reduce sampling errors. And Amazon also has some proprietary trend analysis algorithms. So simple thing to think about. Imagine if Amazon is selling a product that's been around for like 20 years, right? And has been a reasonably stable seller, right? Something like, say, Scrabble, right? People buy Scrabble. It's just one of those things that everybody seems to have a copy of at their house. Uh, Now, over time, in any given year, the things that people buy along with Scrabble, though, that's going to change, right? Based on what's popular in 2020 is not going to be the same as what's super popular in 2010. So, implementing that kind of trend analysis and looking at shorter, closer windows and figuring out how to optimize that, that's kind of Amazon's special sauce. So, even though they have this big batch of data, they know when to look at all of it or when to look at a much more recent subset or even when to look at seasonal factors, right? Because Christmas season sales are going to be a lot different from sales the rest of the year. Anyway, all this stuff about Amazon's recommender system, the fact that it gives a competitive advantage to Amazon, and that scales are going to make it work. Scale is going to make it work better. This is by design. This wasn't some accident that just happened, right? This was part of the big plan going into it. So we'll talk about strategy. Now, as far as casual usage, if we just say, oh, I have a strategy to do something, right, that generally means something along the lines of what you're going to do in light of what other people are going to do. If you're playing chess, you might say, well, I have a strategy. I'm going to attack on the king side, and I think that he's probably going to try to counterattack on the queen side, and then we'll see what happens. Okay, but that's your strategy. That's your plan, and you've thought about what the other guy's going to do. Maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong, maybe your execution is great or not so great, but you have a plan. That's your strategy. Or you might say, I have a plan for how to get a good job after graduation, right? I'm going to take some courses, and I think the businesses are going to be interested in these courses, and then I'm going to apply to such and such firms who I think will be willing to recruit from UIC, right? And then we'll see what happens. So again, you have a plan. Business usage is a little more specific. What it is, when we talk about business strategy, is a plan for a major long-term organizational action, right? So basically, the whole business is going to kind of shift direction because of the strategy. And what defines an overall or an organizational strategy is, number one, tends to occupy a long time horizon, right? So you're not looking forward to the next quarter. You tend to be looking for it in terms of years. In terms of scope, it's going to involve most or all of the functional areas of the business, right? Functional areas, those are departments like accounting, finance, marketing, that sort of thing. And assets, it will generally involve a substantial expenditure or allocation of existing assets. So, for example, I'm not sure how, I'm going to look this up because I mentioned it before. So McDonald's, we're going to find out how many stores McDonald's has worldwide. I am interested. McDonald's stores in the world. 38,000. Okay. So McDonald's has 38,000 or so stores worldwide, right? That's probably not an exact number. And suppose they say, well, we want to expand into some major universities, right? And we're going to pick 20 universities and we're going to put new McDonald's stores on campus there. That wouldn't be strategy, right? Because when you already have 38,000 stores, a couple dozen more is like a rounding error, right? Not a big deal. But if McDonald's says, you know what, we've recognized that our existing McDonald's stores are not fitting the needs of our very busiest customers. So we're going to design a special kind of store that's going to go into super busy places like train stations and airports and universities and downtowns of major cities. And we're going to revamp all those stores, and hopefully, we're going to get a lot more sales out of that. And it's going to involve, at least several thousand stores. That's a big deal. That's potentially a strategy thing there, okay? Because time, you're not going to change that many stores, overhaul that many overnight. You're going to do a few at first, get some lessons learned, see what works and what doesn't work, apply them going forward. Scope, you're going to have a lot of different parts of the business involved, right? You're going to have design people trying to figure out the optimal store layout. You're going to have HR people bringing in new people to work in the stores in new ways. You may need some new IT to track how customers are doing what they're doing in the stores, things like that. And of course, finance to get funding for it all. And assets, again, if you're talking McDonald's, McDonald's has a lot of money, they got a lot of stores, but even for them, changing, big overhaul on several thousand stores is not a trivial thing. So that's what distinguishes strategy from, an effort that is not really strategic. And there's a distinction between organizational and functional. Organizational simply means it involves the whole business. Functional means it involves like one department, like marketing or accounting or finance. Okay, so that's our overview. Would you like to know more? All right, going on. Now, suppose one day you get out of here and you go off and you get a graduate degree and you decide you want to become an academic. Well, the highest aspiration for any academic is to build some complicated yet easy to understand model of how the universe is and slap their name on it. And that's what Mr. Porter did with his 5 forces model. So this guy, this is considered a very important study in its field. He gathered data on many thousands of businesses over decades with the question, how come some businesses are able to earn more money over time than their competitors, right? Because it's a more interesting question than you might think. So I'm going to draw an intersection. All right. So suppose you have a busy intersection. It exists. And you, in all your wisdom, decide to build a rest stop there, right? You got gas stations, you got snacks, you got whatever else people need, okay? And your idea is good because there's a lot of traffic and there's nobody else at the intersection, so you earn a lot of money. Okay? You earn $12. Okay? $12 signs worth of money. Now, your competitors see what, now let's also figure average, industry average, is merely $4. So your competitors look at you and they say, damn, look at all that money you're making. We want some of that. So what are your competitors going to do? You're McDonald's. Burger King is looking at that spot. What's Burger King going to do? Yeah, Burger King's going to move in, right? This isn't rocket surgery. So, competitor builds a rest stop. And what's going to happen when your competitor builds a rest stop there? Are you still going to be earning $12? More like 6. Exactly. So, they get some of your money. But that's all right. I mean, you'd like to keep it all, sure. But $6 is still pretty good, right? It's still substantially above the industry average, isn't it? So what happens? What happens when Wendy starts looking at this intersection? What's Wendy's going to do? Wendy's going to move in, isn't she? Yeah, she is. So another rest stop, okay? And that's going to take money not only away from you, but also from Burger King, okay? So Wendy's is going to get a couple of your bucks. She's going to get a couple of Burger King's bucks. Boom, there it is. Now, at this point, you're all earning $4, which is the industry average. Who might move in that? Let's say Sonic. Sonic is looking at this intersection. What happens if Sonic moves in? How much money is Sonic going to make? Well, if Sonic moves in, it's going to take $1 away from all these, right? It's going to be the total divided 4 ways. So they're going to make $3. And $3 is less than the industry average, isn't it? So Sonic's going to look at this situation and say, man, these guys, they're just barely scraping by, right? They took all the profit out of this corner of the world. Now, maybe Sonic has a better product. Maybe they can outcompete Wendy's. Wendy's goes under. Sure, maybe, right? But the point is, it's not nearly as juicy an opportunity as it was when it was just you there. Okay? So the key insight, key real-world insight, if there's more potential for profit, right? If you have a particularly remunerative opportunity, it's going to draw in competition because your competitors are going to say, wow, I want in on that. But as your competitors move in, crowd out all of that excess profit. There won't be as much money to go around until finally you go down to some more or less the industry average. So we might fairly ask, what makes an advantage sustainable? What makes it possible for a business to earn more than average money for years, even decades? Well, Mr. Porter identified five factors that tend to eat away at any sort of excess profit. And he, like I said, he looked through like thousands of companies over many, many years of data and said, these are the 5 ones that matter. So, first one, competitive rivalry. Competitive rivalry just means how much competition there is in that corner of the world, right? In that corner of the industry. And the easiest way to understand that, hold on, I'm going to make sure I'm recording this and everything's cool with the easiest way to understand, good, we're good, okay. The easiest way to understand that is with Apple and the iPhone actually. So when the iPhones were first released on the market, 2006, there was nothing else like them, right? They were the first of their kind. Apple couldn't keep up with demand, and competitors, it was going to take them years to come up with a comparable product, right? As in fact it did. So for that little window, there's essentially no competitive rivalry for Apple. Apple can't even keep up with demand, so they can charge more or less whatever they want, right? Huge amounts of money. Of course, over time, Android phones come around, Samsung, whatever. There are all sorts of, basically clones of iPhones. And yeah, Apple's product, Apple's profits, they're still making money, but all that is definitely cutting into their profits. So competitive rivalry in a growing industry, it tends to be pretty limited. In a shrinking industry, maybe something like newspapers, right? Newspapers are dying all over. It's kind of stabilized now, but still, like when the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times were both still, major papers, but trying to stay afloat like 10, 20 years ago, they were kind of competing against each other all the time, and they were cutting into their own profits because they wanted to be the last operation standing. Now, next to bargaining power. So bargaining power basically means if one person raises prices, what's the other person going to do about it? So let's consider McDonald's. Suppose you are in the mood for a burger and fries. You're wandering around downtown Chicago looking for McDonald's. You find one, but you find out that they jacked up the price on their burgers to $10. What are you going to do? Not buy it. Well, but you're still hungry.
Look for something comparable.
Yeah, look for another burger, right? So if the customer has options for basically the same product, and of course there are some distinctions between the burgers you get at Wendy's versus Burger King versus McDonald's versus Sonic, but they're all fast food burgers, right? They can be equivalent enough for IDS 200. You can go somewhere else, right? There aren't that many people who love McDonald's that much that they'd pay $10 for, a regular, single or double burger there. Likewise, bargaining power of suppliers. Suppose you're a rancher, okay, and you're selling cattle to McDonald's to be turned into burgers. Well, suppose you're a very, very large rancher, right, and you supply over 75% of McDonald's beef. You basically own the entire states of Texas and Oklahoma, okay? That's your thing. And you tell McDonald's, look, guys, the drought's been bad. It's hard to get water, and there's legislative stuff, and, gas prices are up, costs us more to ship the cattle to you, and labor costs. Oh, don't get me started about labor costs. So McDonald's, we got to start charging an extra 50 cents a pound for beef. What's McDonald's going to say? We know what they'd like to say. They'd like to say, screw you, buddy, I'm going somewhere else, right? But the fact is, if you're that big of a rancher that you're supplying 75% of what McDonald's needs, there's no way, right? There's no way they're covering that overnight because McDonald's is already super big itself. So if you are a very large rancher and McDonald's is more or less dependent on you, you have a lot of bargaining power relative to McDonald's. They don't have much relative to you. On the other hand, suppose you're some small scale rancher, right? You got 1,000, you sell McDonald's 1,000 cows a month. Well, for McDonald's, again, 1,000 cows a month is a rounding error. You tell McDonald's, hey, we're going to, charge 50 cents more per pound. McDonald's is going to laugh at you, say, yeah, well, good luck with that, because we have a lot of other places to buy from. So relative size of the supplier and the, the manufacturer, the company, whatever, that's a source of bargaining power. Last two, threat of substitutes and threat of new entrants. So substitute is the idea that some different product can meet the same need, right? So here we're not talking about burgers anymore. Suppose that, for example, the price of beef just actually has legitimately gone up. And so McDonald's, Burger King, everybody that actually puts beef in their burgers, their prices have all doubled. So what might you do for lunch? Because you're still hungry. You might have a McChicken, that's true. What else? You might go to Taco Bell. What else? Nobody goes anywhere else? What's that? You might go to Five. Well, beef still, but they got other stuff. Yeah, you might get a grilled cheese, right? You might bring lunch from home. You might go to Panda Express, right? There's a lot of options. Point is, just because the price goes way up doesn't mean that the customer then can't say, you know what, I was in the mood for burger, but for $10, I'll go somewhere else, right? So substitutes are always a threat. And last, the threat of new entrants. So new entrants basically means how easy it is for new competitors to join the market and compete against you. So let's return back to our intersection example, right? So imagine in this situation, we're back where we were, where we make lots and lots of money, okay? And suppose that for a variety of legislative and political factors, it's very difficult for anybody else to get to that intersection, right? Suppose you built your rest stop right before there was some very restrictive zoning law about how many different shops could be at that intersection, right? Or suppose you have a gas station there and your gas station is already there, but then the EPA says, you know what? If anybody wants to build another gas station here, we're going to have to do a whole big environmental impact study, and it's going to take a few years, and we're going to have to super seal up all of that, cement and gas tank to make sure there's no bad chemicals leaking out. It becomes very difficult for other people to compete there, doesn't it? And suppose you, the owner of the business, say to the mayor, hey, I'll support your next re-election campaign as long as you do some zoning laws where you say, hey, nobody else can go there. Right? Because shit like that happens all the time too, right? Businesses do get some kind of, maybe not direct kickbacks like that, but, it does happen. So stuff like that puts up hurdles to competitors entering the market is going to make life easier for you, and you'll have a longer window to get those $12. Okay? All right. Now, moving on. So I should also add, right? For Amazon, a lot of these factors apply, right? So competitive rivalry online was intense in the 90s, right? There were a lot of businesses chasing, it was a growing market, sure, but the number of businesses there were also, there were a lot of businesses chasing after it. Did competitors have a lot of bargaining power? Absolutely, right? They could go to any online operation at all. Did suppliers have a lot of bargaining power? Well, in some cases. By the late 90s, Amazon was pretty big. Right? But before then, yeah, maybe. But if it's commoditized products, it doesn't really matter. They're selling the same thing to everybody. Threat of substitutes, yeah, this is a thing, right? If they can't find exactly what they're looking for on one site, they might go to another site and buy something else, or they might stay on the same site and buy something less profitable, whatever. And threat of new entrants, yes, there was a tremendous risk of threat of new entrants, right? Because this is the internet in the mid-90s. So everybody, lots of new companies joining. So Amazon, its recommender system, more than anything, number one, it removed, I wouldn't exactly say it removed the bargaining power of suppliers, but it reduced the threat of substitutes. Why? Because people could come to Amazon, and even if they were finding a substitute product, they had a good chance of finding it on Amazon's site, right? So Amazon's still going to be making money. They weren't going to go, oh, I didn't find this thing I'm looking for on Amazon, I'll go somewhere else. Likewise, threat of new entrants. As Amazon's recommender system starts working better, because Amazon's piling up more and more data and delivering better recommendations, making more money off of them, that becomes one more barrier to new entrants, right? Any new online storefront, if they don't have this kind of recommender system like Amazon does, they're going to be starting out behind in the race. Okay. Now, again, sustainable advantage in this context means some kind of sustainable higher than average profitability. Happens all the time in the real world. So a big one prior to Uber was licensed taxis, right? So each municipality, they'd have so many licenses or medallions they'd assign to taxis in the area, and it was typically less than they thought they would really need, right? So that taxis were always kind of at a little bit of a premium, so they could charge more money than they otherwise would be able to. Prime hotel location, right? If you have a nice beachfront spot for your hotel, you're probably going to be able to charge about twice as much per night as even a hotel that's like a block away, because people really like to be able to roll out, out of their hotel and straight to the beach. Any sort of control of any sort of limited resource, right? For example, De Beers and diamonds. They have a lot of diamonds in reserve, but they only trickle out some of them because they don't want to flood the market and bring the price down. Any sort of long-term exclusive contract, right? If you know you're locked in for 20 years in some sort of sweet defense contract where you're charging the government like 5 times more than you really ought to be able to, you're going to make a lot of money there for a long time. Other companies do continuous innovation, right? That's their special sauce. So companies like Intel for a long time were making lots and lots of money as long as people were still buying lots and lots of new machines with Intel chips, because they'd bring out that new generation of CPU that was faster, and they do it like every year or so. But of course, when we say sustainable doesn't mean permanent, right? So for example, General Motors, which famously went bankrupt about 15 years ago, General Motors for a few decades was kind of at the top of the world, right? So when World War II ended in 1945, the US was basically the only large industrial economy in good shape. And GM was one of the big companies there. So they were cranking out all kinds of cars and other vehicles for years and years and years. But what happened is over decades, the unions would show up and they'd say, give us more money. And the management would look at the numbers and they say, yeah, you know what? We're making a lot of money. We can afford to pay this. That's okay. We'll pay better wages. We'll give nice pension plans, whatever. But eventually around 1970, when the Japanese started making better cars at a lower cost, the GM and the other auto manufacturers, they were so tied up in all their contractual obligations to their employees, they didn't have much wiggle room to try to successfully compete there. And again, culminating in the long, slow decline of the Rust Belt. So it happens. Anyway, sustainable advantage. If you have something there that gives you an edge over your competitors and you can hang on to that, you can make more money. Recommender systems for Amazon was one of those things. Okay. Now for the next thing, we just have a few more slides actually. So if you'd like to ask any questions, now would be an ideal time. We're going to try to catch up with the other people. All right, that's fine. Okay. So first of all, strategy can be roughly, the process of it be roughly defined as, first you decide what's possible and what's not possible. And then from the options that are possible, you figure out what's going to lead to a good outcome, what's going to lead to a bad outcome. Okay? So, for example, if you're thinking about chess, your possibilities are all the legal moves, right? But some of the legal moves are going to be really bad, like, putting your queen right where a pawn can take it for nothing, stuff like that. So you're not going to make those. You're going to think of some kind of better plan, that involves some better moves. For businesses, it's the same thing, right? Potentially a business has a bunch of people that could be doing a lot of different things, but businesses tend to specialize in a fairly small range of activities. So suppose we're talking about McDonald's, right? McDonald's, their big thing is serving food. So anything around serving food, right, especially serving fast food, that's basically going to go into the realm of what's possible. There are other things that McDonald's might make money off of, like toys or clothes or other gear. That's probably going to be more in the stuff that they're going to license the McDonald's logos and characters to appear in different things, right? They're probably not going to manufacture the toys themselves. McDonald's isn't a toy manufacturer. Not that they couldn't set up a factory and do it, but it's just not, it's not the core of their business. Now, from the set of things that are food for McDonald's, you can look at things that are going to have good outcomes, right? So things that will have good outcomes is basically stuff that, is cheap but tastes reasonably good, that kids like, and that you can maybe eat in a car. Okay, so for example, in the late 80s, McDonald's had a more or less failed experiment with the McPizza, which people said was decent. It was better than you'd expect. But the problem is a lot of people don't really want to eat a pizza in a car. You know, we live in the suburbs now. When our family comes into the city, we usually stop at Art of Pizza and try to get a few slices, and we'll eat them in the car because that's what we do now. That's sort of family we are. And my wife always kind of shakes her head and she's sad and says, "Oh, I can't believe we're people who eat pizza in the car now." But we are. But most people aren't. And don't eat pizza in your car. Anyway, so stuff that's possible for McDonald's, right? Again, anything fast, cheap that kids are going to like. Stuff that's not possible or stuff that's likely to lead to a bad outcome. Anything that's associated with cachet, right? You probably wouldn't drink McDonald's brand champagne. You probably would not buy sushi at McDonald's, for example, right? What else wouldn't be good? Maybe ice cream cakes, right? Who's going to go to McDonald's to buy an ice cream cake? Yeah, not saying they couldn't make a good ice cream cake, but it's just not what people are going to McDonald's for. Yeah.
Ice cream cake machine would probably be broken all the time.
It would be. It would. They're working on that though. There's a lawsuit in the works. Yeah, because basically, I read some article about this. There's like one small Italian manufacturer that makes all of them, and like some other company is trying to make much more reliable clones of the McDonald's ice cream machine. And you know, a lot the franchisees are kind of lobbying McDonald's to be able to have those, and you know, that work better. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Most of the time these days when we go to McDonald's, we actually get it. We've actually been able to successfully order McFlurries. I've never had a McFlurry in my life because every time I've gone to a McDonald's and asked for one, we're sorry, the machine's broken. And then you just stop asking after a while. But my kids eat them. So, yeah. Okay. So, strategy development is a fairly standardized process that follows this, right? So first of all, the business looks at what's possible and what isn't possible. And what is possible is the internal capabilities, right? What business is known for being good at, what it's not so good at. Externally, in terms of figuring out what's going to likely lead to a good outcome or a bad outcome, you're going to look at things like what your competitors are doing in the market for that particular product. Now, the way this is typically called in industry is what's called a SWOT analysis. And SWOT is a ridiculous sounding word, but I assure you that people in the real world do say this. My wife, who's a senior manager at Accenture and manages projects, she'll sometimes say, "Oh yeah, we'll have some analysts go and put together a SWOT analysis on this." So it's actually a term that, you know, people use. And SWOT stands for the 4 factors: strengths and weaknesses. Those are your internal attributes. And opportunities and threats. Those are the external ones. So the opportunities, that's places where you can make money, right? So you find some underserved market segment. For example, suppose it became possible for McDonald's to sell beer in McDonald's, right? Somehow McDonald's got a special exemption to do that, but none of the other fast food restaurants did. That's potentially someplace they could make a lot of money, right? Threats, though. What are some threats? Well, suppose somebody comes up with a super cheap synthetic burger, you know, fake meat that actually tastes a lot better and, unlike, you know, a lot of the ones out there, is actually reasonably healthy. People might, you know, really go for that in favor of, you know, as opposed to McDonald's. So things like that, opportunities, places where you might make more money, threats, things that might cut into your existing revenue streams. Anyway, the ideal case for a strategy is some sort of large-scale opportunity that you can exploit with your existing strengths. So classic case of now would be to talk about the iPhone, right? Came out in 2006. Apple already had a bunch of engineering experience doing similar products like the iPod. That was a big hit just a few years before. So large-scale opportunity. People really wanted some kind of smartphone thing. The big competitor at the time was what was called a BlackBerry. If you've seen them, yeah. And people liked their BlackBerries, but the world as a whole pretty quickly abandoned BlackBerries for iPhones, right? So for a while there, Apple was the only game in town making these bags and bags and bags of money. All right. Now, of course, a business has to be aware of its own strengths and weaknesses, right? And internally, that awareness is a lot easier to come by. One thing you can do is look at your own past performance, right? You try to do some similar task. How did it work? So you might say, if you're McDonald's, you're trying to build a new model of restaurant, you say, okay, we did something similar to this in the past. how did it work? How long did it take for us to come up with a new restaurant design? How well did it work, right? That might be the best you can get. You could also look at pilot efforts, right? A pilot effort is a small scale action that is intended to be, the initial try for a bigger action. Same as like a pilot episode for a TV series. So McDonald's might say, well, we're going to make a few high profile restaurants of this new model. We'll see how it goes. We'll see if we learn some lessons about how it can be improved, right? And we'll implement that going forward. That would be a pilot effort. And that would be one way of knowing, hey, is this a good idea or not, without spending a whole lot of money on it. Internally, you can also do skill tracking. So every time there's some project, you can track what your employees did on that, what sort of new skills they learned, if they improved their existing skills, whatever. And you can see, get a better idea based on that. If you track like the overall quality of your various teams, as their quality goes up, you can say, yeah, you know what, we're doing this new thing. It's like stuff we've done before, but our teams keep getting better. We think we're going to do a better job on this than we did in the past. As far as external stuff, that information is tougher to come by. It's always a little bit of guesswork. Your competitors, they're not going to tell you exactly what their capabilities are, but you might have some ideas just by watching, how successful they are in various projects. And, of course, at the top, business people do talk to each other, so they have some idea. For your partners' capabilities, same kind of thing, right? They're not going to let you into their whole database of who's doing what and how well, but you'll have an idea from having worked with them about what you can expect. Product demand, potential substitutes. Again, you can do market research on those. There's always a little bit of guesswork, a little bit of sample error there, but you can get an idea. All right. Okay. Doctrine, culture, and branding. So doctrine and culture are a way of filtering your strategic choices. So remember back in that matrix, we talked about what's possible, what's not possible. Doctrine and culture are going to be kind of the first pass of filtering stuff out into the not possible category. So doctrine is basically a military term, and it means how your armed forces fight or how they expect to fight, and that'll determine, how your armed forces are set up. So the obvious topic right now, Russia versus Ukraine, right? So nobody really would have expected that Ukraine would invade Russia, right? Russia is very big, and trying to take over that whole thing with all those people is probably not something that Ukraine's, really ever planning to do. So they don't have an offensive posture, right? They have a defensive posture. So instead of tanks, they had anti-tank weapons. Instead of long-range bombers, they had like fighters to do local air cover, right? They had minefields instead of, massive artillery buildups. Russia, on the other hand, had a more offensive posture, right? They were looking around to see which of their neighboring countries they could mess with. And so they had, again, all the offensive weapons that Ukraine didn't. So military doctrine determines how you expect your forces are going to fight and what sort of gear they're going to need. Corporate culture is similar. Corporate culture is basically doctrine for business. You figure out how you're going to run your business. Now, one of the classic bad examples is Enron. You guys have heard of Enron? No, maybe some of you. If you haven't, you surely will in your accounting classes because, that's kind of like a landmark event there. Basically, they did a bunch of really shifty stuff, some of it being legal, some of it being fraud, some of it being legal but sketchy, and some of it being outright fraud. Now, the corporate culture at Enron, all the way up to the top, was basically do whatever you got to do to make a buck, right? Doesn't matter if you screw over your consumers. But another company might have said, hey, we want to avoid even the appearance of impropriety, right? We're not going to do anything underhanded or even anything that might be legal but questionable. Other things too, not necessarily just in terms of morals, but in terms of how you run your business. So, for example, Bitcoin's been a big thing lately. A lot of financial operations have taken the view that, well, everybody else is jumping on board the Bitcoin boat. We're going to jump on too. But other operations like, Warren Buffett, his view has been there may be some, there is some reality there to the blockchain database technology, but Bitcoin itself isn't really worth much. So wouldn't invest in Bitcoin. And, they haven't done that. So again, that's a question of priorities. It's less about right or wrong. Anyway, key takeaway, options that are opposed to the existing doctrine or culture most likely aren't even going to be considered. They're just going to look at that and say, nope, that's not really our thing, we'll pass. Okay. Now, again, you can have a similar thing with brands. So every brand has a certain image that it brings to consumers, right? So McDonald's is going to be, as far as their food, it's going to be cheap but tasty. Now, I'm sure McDonald's could make a nice and delicious $1.50 sushi roll, right? But how many people are going to buy their sushi at McDonald's? Not many, probably. Likewise, wedding dresses, right? A wedding is generally an event where the bride gets to show off, how prosperous she is. And I guess to the groom, to some extent, does so as well. Not many brides are going to want to buy their wedding dress at Walmart. And again, I'm sure Walmart can make a nice looking, $199 wedding dress. But no bride, when she's asked, hey, where'd you get that dress, is going to want to say Walmart. So, yeah. Okay. So, all right. Last bit, strategic alignment. So every business, the organization has a bunch of different departments or functional areas that have to work together. So whatever the goal is for the entire organization, all those different departments are going to try to contribute to it some way. And the process of lining up all the departments to support the overall strategy, that's called strategic alignment, right? Basically means everything's pointed in the same direction. So I will briefly discuss the case. A bicycle manufacturer wants to increase sales by 10% every year for, say, the next 5 years. And they're going to do it by introducing a more advanced grade of bicycle. Okay, so we're going to talk about how their different functional areas would cooperate to make that happen, right? So suppose the bicycle manufacturer wants to increase its annual sales by 10% for 5 years. 5 years. Okay, that's their goal. How would the various functional areas help make that happen? Okay, well, first one, right? Design. You would need to design new, higher quality bicycles. All right, so you got to figure out, hey, what are we going to with new features, right? Whatever those are going to be, new features, space age materials, whatever. As far as manufacturing, might need better quality control, new machinery, right? I guess that'll be good for now. HR, right? Human resources might need new quality experts and new operator training, right? Because if you got new machines, the operators might need to do more stuff on it. What else? Finance, right? Finance has to get funding for all the above. What about marketing? Marketing's going to have to advertise these bicycles somehow, right? So maybe reach out to existing customers, right? Especially ones that, maybe bought a bike 5 or 10 years ago and said, hey, I see you got, our Model 22, but now we're selling the Model 24 and it's pretty nice. You should come in and take a look, right? Reach out to existing customers, or maybe offer incentives to new customers and, their friends, that sort of thing. Say, hey, refer a friend to us. If they buy a bike, we'll send you a voucher for $50, right? And of course, design a new ad campaign emphasizing the update. Okay, so all kinds of stuff like that is what's going to happen. Now, this is what happens in when strategic alignment is there. But what might happen is one of these different areas, let's say HR. Suppose HR goes rogue, right? They want to just follow their own narrow goals or functional strategy of cutting costs. Okay, how might HR cut its costs without regard to the impact on the overall strategy? What would be the simplest way for HR to cut costs? just hire anybody, right? Right? So for example, no interviews, just hire the first person who applies, right? Likewise, no research, no nothing, no hours for that. You might also add up, cut way back on training, right? They say, we don't need any training. You guys know enough, whatever. You'll figure it out on the factory floor, right? Probably would not be good for the overall operation. Would HR cut its budget? Would they save money? Sure. Would it be bad for the overall organization? Very probably. Okay, so this is the importance. Every functional area can have its own strategy, but when you have strategic alignment, they're geared not to, optimize their own local situation at the expense of the organization. They're trying to optimize how they can contribute to the overall strategy. Okay? All right. Cool. I guess this is a good break time. We'll see you all on Friday, and we'll surely make a good dent in this lecture. We'll come close to finishing it. We'll see you all next time.